Yesterday when I talked to Greg, I said to him, I don't want to just read your bio tomorrow. I want to say something that has more depth about who you are. And I asked him to share with me his journey of how he got into this work. And I have permission just to share a little bit about who he is as a being rather than as a practitioner. You can look on the website and read his bio if you're interested in that part. But when Greg was 29 years old, he was living in San Francisco, and he had eye surgery because he had an eye disease at that time. And he was involved with a group of practitioners who were studying Gestalt therapy. And during one of his Gestalt meetings, he went outside for a break just to have a little peace and quiet for himself. And he was sitting in a garden. And he was astonished to discover that standing in front of him in a 6-foot countenance was Jesus. He had a direct contact and direct experience with Jesus. And he wasn't very distressed or surprised about it. It just felt really comfortable for him on some level, even though he'd never had an experience like this before, ever. He'd been on a spiritual path, but never had a direct contact. And he was told by Jesus to go and meditate. So that's what he did. He went back into the building and he started meditating. And then Jesus sat next to him and touched his shoulder. And this was the beginning of Greg's journey of tuning into the other dimensional realms, the non-physical realms. And since then, he's been incorporating his capacity to work with spirit guides and helpers and to work with disincarnate entities to help them do healing on a soul level. And his presentation today will be giving us the information that he spontaneously came up with before any training of how to do spirit releasement work. He was channeling his experiences and the wisdom that was being given to him through these guides and helpers that ended up working with him and still today work with him as he does spirit releasement work. So we're very honored and blessed to have him to share this wisdom. And I'm going to turn it over to Greg now. You can take it from here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know what to say. Okay, so just some of you know that I wrote a book on everything I do. And I don't know if you can see this. This is the book. Can you see it?
Yes.
Is it on the screen? It's available through Amazon. So almost everything, I used to say everything I do is in the book. And now it's not true. There's more that I keep getting, in particular around spirit releasement and regression work. So I want to talk a little bit about my approach to all of this. And some of you may hold the same, but in myself, I embrace the universe and the servants that work with us in the light of pure being. And it's a regular thing. I wake up in the morning and I ask them to show up and have a conversation, have tea. And among them is, in addition to Jesus, is Mary and Elijah. Elijah I met through a sister teacher of mine who was co-teaching a group that I was in years ago, that I was co-teaching with her. And prior to this group, I had written a manual on how to do remote work, regression, and spirit releasement. And so my friend Anne was working with her husband being a surrogate for work that they were doing for clients. And he kept noticing, he had spiritual sight, still does, and would notice these spheres, which were the angels that were showing up. And there was one that had a different tinge of color around its exterior in the sphere, kind of a pink reddish color. And he had no idea who it was, but that being was helpful. And so then in the class that I was co-teaching with Anne, this one particular Sunday class, I was sick. I was home in bed, so I couldn't attend it. But the class had this experience where Robert was talking about this, whoever it was, and wondering. And so Anne said, well, let's call that one forward. So she put Robert into trance, and he called forward, and immediately there was a column of light in the midst of the circle of students in the room. And this voice that came through Robert saying, I am the heart of Elijah. And I was on Mount Tabor, with Jesus and Moses and John and all that. And so that was the message that Anne told me after their class about what their experience was and his presence. So I'm pretty practical. I sat up on the edge of bed and I called out this fellow. And I said, would you come down and hang out with me so I can get to know you? And he did immediately. And I've been getting to know him ever since. And that's an understatement. He has taught me how to do lots of things that I do. But the most profound thing is the teaching of how his presence and the presence of others, angels, Mary, Jesus, other divine beings, Kuan Yin, can bring about total transformation in trauma, so that the client becomes the experiencer of the divine when you invoke one of them to come and touch them in their trauma. So the subtitle of my book is Bringing the Presence of the Divine Light into the Trauma of This and Other Lives. So I started working with Elijah on a regular basis, and he just became a friend, and sometimes had a lot of wit. He would tell jokes. He would bring up a song that was relevant to what I was experiencing, and would guide me, turn left, turn right, so on. So mostly it's his presence as a friend and my teacher. He's obviously my teacher now. And I work for Jesus, and that's okay. And that's like a given. So my way of approaching this is that I'm anticipating when a client comes to see me that I'm going to come into a mode of working with them that will be healing. And it'll probably involve the invocation of divine presence, using angels or asking for Elijah's presence or someone that the client has a relationship with already, which is preferable. So given all that, then over the years in my regression work, I've used that divine presence to come into bringing, touching in the death experience and in the healing and in the trauma of prior life, and it's transformational. I did a video, it's still on the web on my website under the new regression therapy or / new regression therapy, which was made in 2011, is that right? Or 2000 years ago, or who knows? And it was where I was interviewed by one of the members of IART, which is a group that I used to be in. And I talked about discovering how to bring presence, divine presence, into trauma. And it's a good story. And if you know, what's her name? Well, it's from the book Core Transformation, which I studied, and I augmented how the author utilizes the principle, but effectively she takes apart a subpersonality and invites it to look into itself at different stages, asking it what it wants. And eventually, notwithstanding interruptions by other beings or other subpersonality, that part or that subpersonality comes to a very high state of consciousness within the client's experience. And it's extraordinary and doesn't make any sense rationally, but here it is happening. I started using it for myself, for my own work, my own healing. And I saw the principle of if I was in, or if the client was in a high state after interviewing the part that was sick or disturbed, and then we take that high state and carry it back to where the trauma was created, we would find that the trauma was healed by that invocation, inviting that presence into the trauma. So I don't curse very often, but this is a big F deal. It is so important and so simple that it's astonishing. So I use that principle all the time. When I had a client yesterday who was having issues with 2 abortions that she had 30 years ago. And so I knew that I wanted to help her come to healing of those experiences, and eventually brought in divine presence into that trauma and did a number of other things relevant to that. And she felt much better and clearer and so forth. It can be used all the time in any kind of issue. The evolution of spirit releasement therapy for me was out of Bill Baldwin's book by that title. And if you haven't read it, you should read it. He, when he wrote, he combined regression therapy with spirit releasement therapy, which was his own nomenclature for that work. Spirit releasement therapy is the title of the book. And it was copyrighted by him, but he's gone now, and his wife's gone too. And I don't know if there's any critical possession of that title, but it's extraordinary to read. And that was my intro to the presence of dark beings attached and deceased human spirits. And Baldwin used different protocols involving angels of the white light to bring in clearing and removal or escorting entities out. And so it raises the question of angels of what? Angels of the white light. And some of us may invite angels in, but not knowing who's responding. So I strongly encourage you to choose who you want to come in. I remember having dialogue with a friend of mine who does regression therapy in Europe, talking about angels, and say, oh, we can't use angels because you don't know what they are, they're bad, they're going to mess you up. So you only want to invite in angels of the white light. That clarifies what your intention is, and those are the ones that show up. And then they will be more than glad to help you in clearing out attachments, helping deceased humans that are attached to go home, and so forth. So in my book, I describe a protocol for doing a scan using the metaphor of a mirror to identify in a client if there are any attachments. And in that process, it can be uncovered any number of possibilities, but generally either deceased humans, which are called earthbounds, although I never use that term anymore, and dark beings or demons, and extraterrestrials or ETs. And to the issue of ETs, I used to have much more encounter with them in clients than I have recently. It seemed like there's been a diminishing return or something. But they are complicated and simple and complex all at the same time. So when there are different ways that you can identify the presence of attachments within a person. And people who have written, who are authors of the literature in this field, have exclaimed that there's their belief that 80 to 90% of us, that's you and me and everyone, has attachments of one kind or another. My experience is it's very rare to find a client who doesn't have someone attached. And in those cases, I can think of 2 or 3 cases. They're so holy and clear and bright that you just want to give them more space in the room. But that everybody that has written about this concurs that it's normal. And that doesn't mean it's a good thing, but it's normal or usual might be a more accurate word. So there are different ways of identifying, and the presumption is that if you find someone that has attachments, their behavior, their feelings about themselves, their sense of well-being is all going to be impacted, sometimes very dramatically or sometimes in a relaxed manner, by the presence of the others that may be uncovered. So in the protocol in the book, I use the metaphor of a mirror. And so I do the induction and have the client be in a natural state, a relaxed state. Usually they've walked down a hillside and a stairway on the hillside. Each time they take a step, they go deeper inside, and using induction protocols like that, any of which would be satisfactory. And then at the bottom, when they're in the natural setting, in this case, it's a creek with a forest, I call for the presence of a mirror. And it shows up, and I tell them that it's a full-length mirror, and they can look and see their own reflection if it's available. That's not the phrasing I use. I'll say, so when you look in the mirror, see if keyword, you notice your own reflection or the reflection of anything in that mirror when you look. 1, 2, 3. Most of the time, people will see something, but not necessarily themselves. When a person has a sense of their own reflection, it may be when they're much younger, they're a child, which indicates it's almost an invitation to go for regression and for healing back in the childhood. Or they may see entities, or they may see a dark cloud or a spot or something that looks like a scary energy, or a frog or a snake or a dark being of some kind. Or they may see a deceased human. And as you probably know, it's common. I mean, people die, but that doesn't mean they go home. Often, not often, we'll find people that are deceased, but they've attached to the client. So I want to talk about that a little bit, about deceased humans in attachment. So if it is seen in the mirror as such, I speak directly to the entity and ask, they have a name, do they remember having their own body, and do they recall how they left the body, the death experience. And in that interview, they will share what happened as best they recall. Sometimes, often, people die and they get lost and they have no point of orientation. And one of the reasons they're attached to your client is because of your client's well-being, and they're a warm, loving person, or maybe not, but at least they're available. And so upon interviewing the deceased human and their death experience, I may ask them to look inside themselves to see if they notice anything attached to them. I don't say go looking for dark beings, which is leading, and hopefully you understand that's illegal, doing leading questions. And I didn't mean that seriously. Anyway, so you want to find out if there are others attached to them. And there may be other deceased humans or dark beings. If there are dark beings, we want to clear them out. And we'll do in the interview, I'll ask the dark being if it has an agreement with so-and-so to be here with her. And if they say yes, then I need to go and clear out the vulnerable state that the deceased human was in just before the attachment took place. And I'll say that. I'll ask the heart of Elijah to come. This is where I utilize his presence. And it's really simple and mind-blowing. And I'll say, I ask the heart of Elijah to come and to be with this one in the vulnerable state that she was in that life just before this dark one came in and made an agreement with her. Now, it may be that that there's no agreement, in which case I simply ask the angels of the white light to envelop the deceased human and lovingly escort her into her true home in the heaven worlds. I will have already asked her, do you want to go home? And they all know what home is. I don't have to describe it, or rarely, but if I use that term in the question of seeing about escorting them out of the client's field, they'll say yes. So I say to the angels to come and lovingly escort this one that we've been having dialogue with into its true home in the heaven worlds, in the white light. And then I listen, and the client tells me in a few moments or a minute whether that deceased human is gone or not. If the deceased human stays and is not leaving, then it's like, what's the story? So we need to ask, what is it? You can ask the entity that's attached, what is it about Jane that keeps you here with her? And the entity will tell you, well, it's because she needs me, or because she's so loving and I'm lost. And any number of things. Usually they're a reflection of the personality of the client that they're attached to. So then I may ask for healing of that state that they're attaching in through that agreement, the deceased human and the client. So I may ask the heart of Elijah to touch them and to dissolve that relationship lovingly. And that often helps them go home and be free to be with themselves. So then, if the client or the deceased human may identify dark ones that are attached. And so it would interview the dark ones if they have an agreement, or I want to speak to the strongest of the dark ones and ask, do you have an agreement to be with so-and-so or not? And if they say no, then immediately I invoke the presence of the angels of the white light. They're like workhorses, and to involve this dark one and the others that may be with him, removing them into the appropriate place for them in the white light. Now, all this protocol is in the book. It's like verbatim, pretty much what I'm citing here. Now, sometimes what I'll find in doing a regression that when a person in the therapy seems stuck in a particular theme and they're not moving out of it, and in the regression, maybe they don't want to die, or they get stuck in the death experience. First thing is, if that's the case, if the client in the regression and you're back in a prior life and they're stuck in the death experience, then you want to invite someone to come bring healing to that. And maybe you do, you invite a saint or Mary or Jesus or Elijah to come in and touch them in the death experience that they had. If they're still stuck in that, then make inquiry if there's a dark one attached to them. Often, when someone dies in a death experience, I used to think, well, everybody went home, but that's not the case. People get frozen in the death experience, and all of the associated beliefs that they have with themselves in that state, in that period, in that life when they died, or, and it could be, anything like, I'm not worthy of being alive, of being loved, I'm not worthy of the presence of the light I see it above me, but I can't go there, they won't take me, and so forth. And there may be something in the death where how they were killed that is critical to their being stuck there. Also, there may be a dark one that was stuck with them in the death experience. Deceased humans having dark ones attached to them in the death experience, or clients in regression having dark ones attached to them in prior life deaths, they will be frozen, that aspect of what was happening to them emotionally and somewhat mentally, but their sense of well-being, their judgment of themselves, and their fears will be kind of like locked in. It's like putting a padlock or a lock on a safe. So all the work that you may do with the client after bringing them out of a session, if you don't clear out the dark one that was attached to that theme that they died with, you're going to have difficulty with, the client will have difficulty. So you go and you make inquiry with the client in that state that they died in. Is there someone attached to you? And if they say yes, if it's a dark one, do you have an agreement with that one to be with you or not? And if they say yes, then you can investigate the vulnerable state that they were in before the dark one came in for an agreement, because that will all often reveal different aspects and qualities and issues and themes that the client has brought into your office, but they may not be conscious of, but something that has been lurking within their psyche for a long time. Anyway, you can also be brief about it and just ask the heart of Elijah to touch them in the, quote, vulnerable state that they were in, because that's what the dark one attached to, was that, and through that state. And then he does, and then they're okay, and all of a sudden the dark one lifts off And sometimes a client will have a visual they're sharing with you about that experience, but the dark one is still there. They haven't left the universe of the client yet. They're a good ways out. They're not in the field within the energetic field, but they're in the neighborhood, you might say. And so then you need to call upon the angels of the white light to come in and envelop that dark one that's lingering, nearby, in a web of pure white light, and remove it into the appropriate place for it in the white light now. Using the word now is very powerful if you haven't discovered it and you're doing work with clients in regression and bringing healing, invocation of divine presence. So then if you've addressed the death experience and the client having been frozen in that will be altered. And you may want to then revisit that life that they were in, that they left, and so forth. Another element that shows up, or the presence of dark beings, that's very critical, is often in the womb, in the prior life, prior incarnation. And many of us who do regression therapy, it wouldn't occur. I mean, I take them all back to the womb and everything's lousy or everything's good, and we process that life and so forth. But if there is a dark one there, one of the themes that were being held in consciousness by the child unborn in the womb or by the mother will still be with the client today, and will have been, you may have been made aware of it if they went through that life and processed it. But if you go when you're in the womb and you say to the client who's in trance in the womb in this life or a prior life that you've ended up in, is there anything or anyone else attached with you while you're in your mother's womb in that life? And then if they say, well, yes, there's this ugly thing over here, or it's a dark one, or it's a demon, or some kind of characteristic of a dark being. And then you ask, does it have an agreement to be with you? Which is possible. It could have made an agreement in a prior incarnation with the client whom you're currently interviewing in their womb state. So you need to go to where that agreement was made, if there was one. Is this all complex enough for everyone? It's a good thing I remember it. And so you say, so show me where the agreement was made and what was happening with Jane in that prior life, and how was she vulnerable to enter into it. And so she's being beaten or abused or manipulated or any number of things in their victimhood, so that they're wide open for a dark one to come in and say, have I got a deal for you? I'll make you feel better. I'll make sure they don't beat you up, which is never is fulfilled. It's always a lie. So you need to go to that vulnerable state then that the client was in, again, prior to coming into this incarnation, and clear out the dark ones using the protocols. So then if you're in that life or this regression, and you clear out a dark one that was identified that was augmenting the mother's terror or the mother's fear or her own difficulties, you'll find that the regression is totally different. So how are you now that we've cleared out this SOB out of your field? What's your birth like? Oh, it's good. It's free. I can stretch as much as I want. I'm loved, and all kinds of beautiful things. And then how's your life unfold? It's good. My parents stay together. My dad's strong. My mother has 2 more children and they're all good and we're happy and so on. So a whole different history happens. And out of where does this come from? Well, it comes from the self, from the being of your client. I don't make it up. I don't say now you're going to have a scripted life that says here on paper you're going to feel this and that. No, let them have the experience, the feeling experience anew of growing up without that dark one's presence. And it's wonderful, extraordinary, and it's profound for them. And not bad for you too, if you're listening. So that's a place where you want to check it out. If you're doing regression, you want to go back to the womb in this or the other life, wherever it shows up, and ask, are there any others there with you? And avoid leading questions, although sometimes I'll just say it. Is there a dark one in the womb with you or not? Still questioning with it or not. So that's, I've learned that recently. So that changes the therapist and the client's experiences around in the regression work, where we used to go and with good intentions have them relive a life, and then maybe they feel much better afterwards. And I don't agree with rescripting, but even with that, they can make help a person feel better. But if you have a dark one attached and you clear it out of the womb, it'll blow your mind what happens, and the heart and the well-being of the client is really goes through an extraordinary shift, and shift is the word for it. Now I want to talk a little bit about unusual attachments by earthbound spirits, or not quite earthbound. I would say people who are in transition, dying. I've had a number of experiences of deceased humans in the death process attaching to me. Don't ask me why. Maybe they saw the label on my door or got my address from iBart or something. I don't know. But one was so amazing, and God bless my wife, who was in the bed with me and witnessed the whole thing, was someone who was dying in an epileptic seizure, a female, and attached to me in the midst of having that seizure. So there I was, feeling her presence, seeing all this energy of her, and my arms were flailing and everything. So my wife says, and then I realized that it was someone else. It wasn't me, but she was bringing me that experience, which was not fun. It was very intense. I had to be very willful, which I'm never willful, but I had to be very willful and move her out so that the angels could take her home. But she didn't know what was happening to her. She was in a confused state of epileptic fit. And it came into me like as if I were a suction or something. So then they called the ambulance for me. And by that time I had cleared her out, but was glad to go to a hospital and be interviewed. And the neurologist thought I was crazy and making up stuff, and so on. And then later he started following me on the internet, going, maybe this guy's not so crazy. And so that was fine, but it was an eye-opening learning about the possibilities of what can happen when an entity attaches to you. I'd always known and seen before how when a deceased human attaches, they bring to us the state they died in. Here was someone in the death process. They hadn't left their body yet, and they were still flailing. So it's in the death experience where someone is dying and they come to you, in that they may not be completed, or they come to the client. I had another experience, seems like I was going to school this past year, and where my best friend from high school, a guy that I loved deeply and who was a wonderful buddy, great friend. We grew up together. And he was the same age, actually. I think it was a year older. But anyway, so I had a feeling that he had died. Pay attention to those. If you have friends that you're all of a sudden you're missing or feel close to, check them out, see what you can do to help them. So I didn't go and look and see. I just, thought, well, we'll connect someplace in some way. But I felt all this love for him, and I felt him reaching out to me. And sure enough, one morning, 3:00 in the morning, he came into my field in the state that he was still dying in, which was a heart attack. And so I was having all of the symptoms of that, but I knew it was my friend. And so I immediately brought healing to that experience, his death experience he was having, and had the angels and his friend Jesus take him home. Another experience I had that was not fun was my deceased mother, after years of consternation about her presence, was attached to me. I went, no. So I had to take care of that. That was like, what are you doing there? She was attached to my left ankle. It was strange, but that's the way she was. So attached entities, deceased humans, can carry all kinds of things with them that are like their baggage or their issues or their themes. And when you want to, basically, there's a rule. I think William Baldwin said it better than I can, but that is, it's never right to have someone else in your field affecting how you are. It's never a good thing, unless it's God or Saint Jerome or something. But then because you invited him or her, and you're in that state of love and being and acceptance. Otherwise, like I have a client who intermittently I see, and the other day she said, well, you know what I do? When I'm pissed off at a customer of mine and I want them to be afraid of me, then I invite in some dark ones and I get real scary. And I went, no, that's not a good thing. But she'd worked with me a long time, apparently didn't get it yet. So I warned her that was dangerous, what she was doing. When people have addictions and they draw in a deceased human who has an addiction, that addiction is strengthened by the presence of the deceased human. Alcoholics who commonly have deceased alcoholics who just want to drink. And that's what they say when you interview them. When you interview the deceased alcoholic that is attached to the client, and then, why are you here? Well, I want to drink. And they want the physical experience of being in the alcohol, which is theirs to have, given permission from their host, the client. So when someone comes in to the client's field, they come in, they bring in a certain level of consciousness into that client. And a deceased human, if you interview them, what your death experience was like, how do you feel about leaving the body? They may not even know that they left their body. They may be in a state of confusion or lost, and so may not understand your explicit questioning about that. So when you start to pick up on that they're in a lost space, tell them, I can help you and you need to go home. And maybe they're not in a very good place about whatever that is, of course. And sometimes what I do is I bring them an experience of what it will be like for them when they do go to their true home in the heaven worlds. And they're sitting there going, what? So I ask the angels of the white light to bring them a taste of what it will be like. Bring John Doe here a taste of what it will be like for him when he chooses, very important languaging, to go to his true home in the light, in the heaven worlds. And then I wait. And John Doe, who was attached to my client, is no longer cranky or ornery or miserable and resistant to going into his interlife experience. And they usually say, oh, I'll go. You can feel the power of that presence, divine presence that you're asking angels to bring to them. This is going to be your experience in a few minutes. Oh, okay, I'll go now. And it's amazing. And it's wonderful. And so you have the angels do that work for you. You don't need to sit around for a couple of hours trying to persuade somebody who's already dead that they need to go home by having rational explanations. You just bring them a taste of what it will be like when they do go there. And the angels bring that toot sweet, quick and ready, and they're bathing in it and they're thankful. Now, I want to talk about doing your own work, whereas if you're doing spirit releasement work with your clients or not, even if you're not, because you're empathetic, for one, you're loving and open and want to serve those people that come to your office, you're going to draw in, if you haven't already, and probably many of you have, attachments. And so deceased humans or dark ones, either one. So you need to know how to take care of yourself in that, other than just a client. It's easy with a client. You have them do this and that, and then you ask the angels to come in, or you ask Elijah to come and dissolve that vulnerable state, and so forth. But if you're laying there and you got home and you're tired and exhausted, you need to have a mesh of light drawn through your field after working all day or immediately after seeing the client. So I ask the angels of the white light to come and draw a mesh of gold white light through my field now, today, as I'm resting here on my couch, and draw up any residue from the work that I've just done today with so-and-so, and draw up any dark ones that may have come into me from her, and removing them all into the appropriate place for them in the light now. So you use the same protocols that you would use for your clients on yourself as a matter of routine. And then, a couple hours later, when you're having dinner, you realize you feel good. And you're glad that you cleared out that whatever it was that was bothering you after the client session. I don't know how to be perfect, although it was suggested to me the other day in my experience with Elijah, which has been really profound. And so my friend said, well, you probably don't have any attachments then, because he was so close. And I went, no, he probably would make sure I'd get attachments so that I would learn how to deal with them. Like my best friend who died, or the woman who died of a seizure, what I learned and what the neurologist eventually began to understand. It's like teaching goes on, and you're made use of, like it or not, you're being utilized for the love of this planet. And that's okay, as long as I get done with it. Okay. I want to encourage everyone to, you can go to the back of my book, to the bibliography, and there are a number of important books that are listed there. And one is Spirit Releasement Therapy by Baldwin, which is, I think, should be considered the Bible of this work, though it's a little disorganized and a lot has been developed since then. But Bill did this when there was a group similar to us, but 20, 30 years ago in California, New York, and Denmark, and London, therapists who were developing protocols for regression therapy and practicing on each other. Great characters, great people, really beautiful people. And Baldwin, somehow, I never asked him, like, how'd you get to this? But he started talking about attachments and entities and dark beings and deceased humans, earthbound spirits. And he got shunned for a while. People said, oh, you're full of shit, and go away, Bill. So nevertheless, he was working on his doctoral thesis in psychology was Spirit Releasement Therapy, his book that is actually his doctoral. But he kept pursuing that. And then others are very valuable to read. What's it called? Let me look this up. One, Remarkable Healings is the title. And the author is a psychiatrist. Well, it's in here.
Modi.
Yes, right. MODI. Thank you, Peter. Good. And that's like 600 pages of client notes. Incredible experience. And she has clients describe them, draw pictures of them, and it's almost too much. But it's all there. And she's also very Christian in her orientation. I think she was or may still be in a community of Christians, and was practicing in Ontario or Ohio, someplace. Anyway, that book is priceless, and it'll take you a while and just absorb it. Another book that's important is Jack Elias. Jack doesn't do spirit releasement therapy, but he does his own version of hypnotherapy that's really good. So his stuff with NLP and working with clients is something that should be incorporated. And when you read his material, which is called Finding True Magic, that's his book, it'll be something where you go, gosh, that was too much. You just keep reading. And after a while, you start to get his drift on things. One of his phrases I love is called egoic minding, where the client is sitting there thinking about what they're experiencing and messing up their session with you by doing that. Let's see. And of course, Edith Fiore, The Unquiet Dead. And Irene Hickman, who was a rascal. And she wrote about remote depossession, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute. And who else was important? And Winifred, like Lucas, 2 volumes set on regression therapy. I think it behooves us all to understand the history, the legacy, if you will, of those that have been here doing this work for 20 or 30, 40 years before now. And you get a sense of the incredible journey that they were in her book on that. And then it's important to read Michael Newton and understand the life between lives stuff and to tap into that. Our British colleague, what's his name? Let's see. I'm not good on names. Oh, Andy Tomlinson has written about that too, the life between lives stuff. Now, there's one thing that Newton does not acknowledge, and that's the presence of attachments. So he did 30 years of working with people who were describing their experience between lives and documented it and kind of drew a map of the interlife, which was pretty good and very valuable if you're taking clients on journeys between lives to understand the common experience they may be having that others have. And everybody has to read Yogananda. I'm sorry, he's a mushy guy, you know, Hindu and Indian and so forth, but he's wonderful. And there's others here too. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about doing remote spirit releasement. And I do this all the time. I usually maybe 1 session a week through a surrogate. The surrogate happens to be the editor of the second edition of my book, Sheila Judge, and she's a psychiatrist also, and it's very good. And so I have a client somewhere out there and they call and they say, I'm having a hard time and I can't get through this. And would you help me? And I want you to do it remotely through someone else. Or would you do some work for my son? Could you heal my son, please? Who can't come into your office because he's in British Columbia. Or my grandmother, or my mother, or whoever. For some reason, that person is not available to come in and be with you. So I say yes, and I do an interview about the person and what's happening and the description. And I don't try to get, I actually don't do a regular thorough investigation unless it seems appropriate. But I get the basics, the photograph, the location, date of birth of the person that we're going to do this remote for. Then I set up a date with Sheila, and then in that session, the surrogate is placed in. We make a prayer together for healing of so-and-so, and often will be explicit to ask for help from the spirits that love us unconditionally, and you all know who that is. to help identify if there are any attachments that this person may have. And then also to bring healing that's appropriate to show us what is needed, what regression work might be needed today for this one. Then I put the surrogate into trance, nice, deep, relaxed state. And in that place, in that trance state, invoke the presence of the client. And then I have her observe the client. And I say, when I count to 3, if there are any attachments with this young boy, any kind at all, you'll have an awareness of their presence when I count 1, 2, 3. And sure enough, they show up. They can be observed visually or feeling their presence, or something in the energy of the person becomes known to us, a feeling or a dark spot, or he's limping and he wasn't before, and so forth. And then the interview that takes place with that client is about fulfilling that wish from the parent or guardian or person that wanted the healing. So that it may take an hour, hour and a half to process. All of this is recorded, and then the recording is sent to the client or the mother of the child, whomever it might be. And then we follow up, usually in a week or so, sometimes longer. And I find that sometimes the work is so profound through that protocol that we know that deep healing has happened, and then we wait for it. And other times, not so deep. It varies a lot. But it's if you use the protocols that are in the book, that are the same as doing the therapy in your office, you'll come up with healing for someone you never have seen, may never know, and who may never know you. So, okay. Do we have questions at all?
It would be helpful if you raise your hand on your computer screen. Can't get everybody on the screen at one time here. Anybody? Oh, Peter?
I wanted to add that involving Michael Newton and his Life Between Lives work. Several months ago, we asked Peter Smith, who was head of the Newton organization for 10 years, to be a speaker at our book club, IBART Book Club.
Right.
Peter's a friend of mine from over the years, and he and I had talked about Michael's resistance to accepting the fact that earthbound spirits, negative entities actually existed. And Peter shared with me that he'd had conversations with Michael before he died, and that Michael had, in fact, truly realized that, yes, they do exist, even though his early books say they do not, and that he was dealing with clients at a very high vibration in his work, so that these energies didn't seem to appear in those early sessions that he'd had, or the early books that he wrote. But that Peter said, oh yes, they do exist, and as Greg has mentioned, and I've discovered as well, they really do exist, and we can help our clients release them and send them home, or back into the light, or wherever they need to go.
Good. Great. I wanted to say, while I'm remembering it, that a new tool that I had come across, and it was through the work with doing Connie Ray Andreas's core transformation, was that to identify what is attached, if anything, very immediately or quickly. So a client comes in and they say, I'm depressed. And they say, and I say, where and how do you feel that? And they'll say, well, I feel it in my chest, and probably most of you have run into that with your clients. And tell me about the feeling in your chest. Well, it's heavy. And how long have you felt? A long time. Okay. So I may put them into light trance, or just make use of the state they're in right there. And I'll say, so call forward the energy of that part that feels that way, heavy in the chest. And they do. And then I say, welcome. Say to this part that's, we don't know what it is, but say to it, I welcome you. And they do that. And this is all from the beginning of the protocol from Connie Ray's book. And then the next question of the part, the subpersonality, typically is asking it what it wants. And if it's a part, an actual part, then there's a whole sequence of steps that you go through where eventually this part will show you a real high state of being. And that's extraordinary and wonderful. And you can use the steps that Connie Ray has, or just go directly to where the part was created and bring down that higher state. Let's say, and this is very common, if you process a subpersonality, they may end up in heaven someplace, in a high state of union with the divine and ultimate love. And I'm not making this up. This happens all the time. So then you say, okay, so let's, what Connie Ray does is just step back down to a lower level of experience with that part. And I avoid that. I just say to the client, so Susan, when I count to 3, you'll be back in the first experience of the depression, of that heavy feeling in your chest. 1, 2, 3, and then she's like 3 years old. Her parents are fighting. Her father is a terror, and she's scared and worried about her life. And so then I say, now invite that higher state that we were just in, that had evolved out of that part, which for her was union with God, and bring it into that experience when you're 3 years old. And it works. It's like, it's another way to invite in divine presence into trauma, instead of what Connie does, which is doing a stepping down, which is good, but this is simpler. So I was using that and finding clients healing of their trauma in this or another life. And then I found out sometimes I would ask a part what it wants, and it would say, fuck you. And I go, oh, bingo, guess who that is? And it's the dark one. Rarely have I found it to be a deceased human who's swearing at me. But the dark ones want you to go away. So when you ask them what they want, they'll tell you, we want you to go away. And sometimes it'll be literal, just like that, or want you to die or be miserable. And then you say to the dark one that's wanting you to leave, so what are you doing here? What are you doing with my client? Oh, I want him to destroy himself. That's my purpose. So you've got a dark one who's been messing with the client, and it's taken you like 3 minutes to get to that, instead of a long procedure, a long protocol of regression and uncovering. And so there they are. So do you have an agreement, dark one, to be with my client? No. That's okay. Well, that's good, because now I want the angels of the white light to come and envelop you in a web of pure white light and lift you up and out of the field that you're in my client, into the appropriate place for yourself in the white light now. If they do have an agreement, then you ask, so what was happening with the client that he or she was vulnerable to enter into an agreement with you? And the dark one will tell you. They're pretty good at labeling just exactly what was going on. Well, his wife had left and he was depressed and felt life was not worth living. And I came and said, no, you can stay with me and I'll make you feel worth living, which was a lie. So then I invite the heart of Elijah again to touch the client in that vulnerable state just before that agreement was made. And then the entity leaves, it just starts lifting off. And I had the angels of the white light to finish the process of removing it into the appropriate place for it in the light. Now, there's something that I think Bill Baldwin talked about, and I think I referenced it in my book, but I'm not sure, which means I need more vitamins. So that is like, what happens to these dark ones that you send into the light? How does that work? Isn't that hard on them? Aren't you being cruel or, no. So here is the process. I've had this experience a number of times. And if you'll pardon me, it's profound. And you can have it, it's safe. And that is, you have an entity that's attached to the client, a dark being, and it's obvious that that's what they are. And then you start a sequence of questions. And you say to the dark being, look into your center and tell me what you come to. And they do. And what do you notice? There's a warm light in there. Okay. Go into that warm light, feel it, go into the center of that warm light and see what you come to. And they do. And you can take them in deeper and deeper, all the way back to the Godhead before they entered into emergence out of the Godhead. And then when they're back there and they're in bliss and union with the divine, then you say, now, would you like to be with some being that can help you grow in that awareness and consciousness of that light in the Godhead, of the Godhead that's actually in you? Yes. And so you ask the angels of the white light to help them to that place of healing in the heaven worlds, actually, in the light. And then they're gone. So I did that several times. And in some cases, the feeling of divine love for these alleged bad guys, dark beings, was so profound, so amazing, and unconditional. And I was just sitting in a chair, and here's the client, and I'm having a dialogue with this one, and this experience is happening to me, blessing for this entity who just a few moments ago was a pissant crawling up a tree backwards and didn't want any friendship or anything. And then it was explained to me later that what that entity came to on that day was what every dark one that gets escorted out by angels of the white light comes to. You just don't see it all. That's what happens. Good story, huh?
Question. Will you take another question?
Yes.
Diane has her hand up. Thank you, Diane.
Actually, Greg, that was a great segue into my question.
Okay.
And this is a question both for you and any other comments from the group, because as you're discussing, the angels with white light and the dark beings, it struck me as like an archetypal battle between good and evil, in a client's psyche or somewhat like that. It's like, and I was wondering about the origin of the dark beings. Like, were they people with past lifetimes that just chose to choose more the evil path, or like any speculation on the origin of that? I remember as a kid in Sunday school, they were talking about Lucifer, the fallen angel. Is this kind of like, these feel like archetypal themes to me. And it's been a fascinating presentation, so thank you. But the question that comes up to me is this archetypal good versus evil theme that I'm hearing.
Right.
And so any comments by you, Greg, or anybody else? I'd love to hear them.
Okay, so the good and evil is in our position in what appears to be a universe of duality. It's a dualistic way of being, that there's good and evil and good and bad. And where they've come from, in my understanding, is the same place that we have, with some divergence from the mapped out program. That they existed, each one, except for their minions, existed in divine state and union in the Godhead, just like all of us, in before the beginning, you might say. In that state, there was no me and them, no me and you, there was no us and them, and there was divine love and bliss and very little identification, self-identification. Then comes emergence or birth, and lots of spirits and souls coming out. And in that process, a very common experience for most of us, we get sent, we feel as if we're sent out, and the ones who become the dark ones later, same experience. And we go, wait a minute, where's that bliss? Or where is it? What's going on here? And why is it dark and cloudy over there? And what are the thunderstorms? And what are those tigers doing? And my experience is common. It's like we came out and there was nothing. And so we had to create something so that we could identify with it. The ones that become the demons, or the Lucifers and the Satan, they come out and they feel betrayed. Deep, deep, deep betrayal. That's when I've asked them, if you'll pardon the use of the word, interviewed them, that's what they say. It's betrayal. And so what they want in their evolution is to get back at God. Now, this may sound really, is that such a romance novel version of this, but yes, that's what they say. They want to get back. And so the big ones, their intention is to do that. So their coming to healing has to do in part with our reunion in ourselves with that which we thought we had left or was taken from us. And it's the same for them. And it's possible some of them have returned and some are still, pissed off. So that's my version around all that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hey, Greg. Oh,
Hey.
Holly, did you have something you wanted to say?
Make another comment about this is we're living in a dimension of dualities, yin yang, male, female, good, bad, black, white, that whole thing. And that oppositional energy is the matrix through which we have to come to a remembrance of who we are through that painful schism that gets us really stretched far away from our true selves. And when we do past life work, we see this all the time. If we've been a victim, then we know we've been a victimizer at some point. So I see the dance of dark and light as the duality of this dimension. But when we move to the higher realms, as Greg was talking about, it all collapses into oneness again. And any dark beings that I worked with, as Greg says, are pissed off because they lost their power of that union, that oneness. They feel separated from that, and they're trying to get that power through taking it from others until they remember that it's within them. And when Greg was talking about having those dark ones go inside themselves, that's when they get that remembrance. So it's always been there. They just forgot about it because they got so identified with that ego self.
Yes.
That's how I see it anyway.
I agree.
Yeah, when you have a comment about it.
Yes, so I just like to share that I do ask them to look within themselves until they see their own inner light, slightly different wording. And what I find almost every time is uh, the client will report back saying they no longer look like they did. They will report a complete transformation in the dark being. And they'll tell me, oh, it just looks like a normal person now, or a sad woman, or something of the sort. So there's always total transformation. And that's also so interesting.
Good.
Okay, Valerie.
Hey, Greg, I have a couple questions for you. The first one, when you talked about the remote work, and I know that people do remote healing. Friends of mine have had remote healing done with them, so it's a similar thing. Um, is there any protocol that you have for the client? For instance, at a certain time, you want them to lie down, you want them to meditate. Is there a client? Does the client have a protocol while you do the remote work?
Yes, good question. Um, they should not be out playing baseball, but home and be quiet. Just be quiet. And if it's your child, keep them quiet or still entertain them with a distraction for a while. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I would think that would help. And I'm guessing you also do spirit releasement work through Zoom. You don't. It's not just in person. You do.
Yes. Right.
Okay.
I do it on the phone and WhatsApp and Zoom and Skype.
Oh, you do it on the phone also.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. So you don't have to see the client
No.
doing
No.
it. Hmm.
No.
Okay. That's interesting. So I know that people I've talked to, and there's been a couple times when I've done some of the work where I've had a little bit of fear of possibly the entities attaching. Do you think that as a practitioner, if we go in with some sort of fear, that that could also attract an entity? And do you have protocols for practitioners to set up protection, light, different things, so that the entity doesn't come to them; it goes up and out?
If you have the fear, then ask Jesus, God, Elijah, Mary, Kuan Yin, say, I'm aware I have a fear. And then first have the angels envelop the fear, because it could be an entity itself that's creating the fear,
Mhm.
and envelop that and draw it up and out of me into the appropriate place for it in the white light now. If that doesn't do it, then but it's your own self-created fear response to something, then you ask divine presence through one of your friends, come and touch me in that fear. Be with me in that fear. Bring me your love and healing into that fear that I'm holding there. And that'll do it. And then work with your client. And you're right. If you have a fear, then you're going to be open to drawing dark ones or deceased humans in, because that's what happens. But it's okay. It's not an impossibility, and it's not a big deal that you can't rectify like right in the moment.
Yeah. A friend and I did some work in Los Angeles in a basement. There were some friends had bought a small kind of apartment building duplex, and someone had been doing satanic rites in the basement. It was really incredible. So we did a clearing of that, which was very profound and amazing. Have you ever worked where it's not a person, where you've done clearings and releasements where it's not a person?
What do you mean, not a person? What,
Well, this was the whole
oh,
building.
a place.
It was a place,
Yeah,
yeah.
often I'll work with a client and then they'll want to clear out their place. Yes,
Okay, and so you go through a similar protocol with clearing out the place as you would
right,
clearing out the person.
right.
Clear. Okay. Holly.
Would you speak a little bit about the ethics of doing remote work and the karma involved with that for us as practitioners?
Well, I think it's good karma. I think it's helpful. The ethics of it, my answer has always been, if your brother asked you to pray for him, would you? And that's my answer, is that remote work is responding to a request for healing and prayer.
Sometimes I see a difficulty with that because a mom may really want her kid to be a different person, and they would want to control the people to be different people, and they're frustrated because their kid won't do what they want them to do.
Uh-huh.
So they want someone to come in and do some remote healing to change their kid, which to me is like a super codependent, over-involved relationship that's unhealthy. And how would you deal with something like that?
Well, the mom needs help.
Yeah.
She needs healing. And I would become aware of that and point out what her agenda is. And then when I would work with the son or the child, it would be open, not controlling. None of the work that I do is controlling. I rarely use directive questions and so forth. I mean, it's a very open process of invoking presence and what's there, what do you feel, give it a voice, etc. So the son might show up and he might be resistant, or he might have a bunch of dark ones around him, and I'll ask his permission if he wants help.
There you go.
And does he want to help his mother? You know?
You have to kind of turn it around a little bit.
Yeah, really. If someone is controlling, like the mother you described, then I'll have to help her, or I don't have to, but I'll make inquiry about her agenda and her feelings about that. And usually that opens up the whole thing.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
Valerie has one more.
Greg, could you tell us a little bit about like a really profound personality change that you've seen or witnessed in a client that that you worked with spirit releasement?
I see it gradually. The client usually tells me about the shift if I've been working with them directly. Like a new client I have, I did some work with her in the first session and cleared out a couple of attachments, dark ones, and so forth. And then saw her yesterday. And how are you doing? Very light, much lighter. That's a common report from people. Sometimes when we have a whole list of behaviors that they've been familiar with within themselves, and so I'll go through the list from my interview of what their issues were before the session, and I'll say, so how are you around this? And they'll go, I don't remember that at all. Or I'm very different now. I feel loving towards my husband, or we had great sex. Thank you. You know, any number of things that are reporting out by the client, showing the shift. So I have that a lot. I don't have anybody that's come in and said, don't you ever do that again, but it works pretty well.
That's great.
Deb?
Well, Greg has done some work remotely for one of my daughters, and it was amazing. Really, just to Valerie really quickly, before I even had Greg do the work, I had someone else that did, I didn't even know Greg did his stuff at this point. And my daughter, who was just kind of a normal kid, all of a sudden started like not doing her personal hygiene, wouldn't wash, and just was acting not herself. And so I found somebody who did remote work. and found out that a spiritual attachment that was a homeless woman was attached to her, and we didn't catch it for a couple of years, unfortunately, but thankfully we did. But really big changes in her right away, how she kept her room, her cleanliness. It was like my old child was back.
Hmm.
So it was just yeah, it's so fascinating. Greg's book's amazing, and his work was incredible. I could go on and on about the session he had done with her too. But my question to you is, I believe in this wholeheartedly, and I'm a newer hypnotherapist, and I have not brought this work into my practice yet. What I've been doing is, just before I meet with a client, I use a pendulum and I ask questions and I do releasement that way.
Mhm.
But I'm just feeling a little bit intimidated with what will people think, just being a new practitioner. So is there any advice you could give in the pre-talk, and maybe how we could kind of let people know that this will be part of the work? Because, I haven't put it on my website or anything like that. I just don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just making too big of a deal out of it, and people are going to be open to it, but we're definitely in a very Bible Belt area. And I find that sometimes, somebody this week wouldn't even come see me because their priest said they didn't believe in hypnotherapy, which was ridiculous. And so the wife went behind the husband's back and came to me. This was just to stop smoking. I was like, are you kidding me? That the priest did not feel that hypnotherapy was, he just felt it was negative or something. I'm like, I would love to meet that priest and have a session with him just so he could, get rid of those misconceptions, But in the pre-talk, I'd just love to hear anything that you have to say about that.
Well, I would ask for help. I would make a prayer within myself. Okay, God, Jesus, whomever that you relate to in that way, I want you to help me bring this work in the expansion that I'm understanding it in now to more people. Please help me. Bring to me people that I can bring this healing to. And then to figure it out, otherwise it's difficult to figure out rationally, well, maybe if I approached it this way or that way, and it's not needed. So if you pray, ask for help around it. Years ago, a long time, 400 or 500 years, I was a priest in the church, and I was trying to teach that how creation works, that we create our experiences. Well, I got pushed out of the church and condemned and so on and so forth. And what I saw at the time, because I was so frustrated by such a simple thing of trying to get parishioners and the people and the hierarchy in the church to wake up, which was naive on my part, was there was this tsunami of opposition seemingly coming at me, that I couldn't teach that, I couldn't do that, and so forth. And in the regression, my own regression, I realized I had created this tsunami.
Mm.
The opposition I was experiencing was my own creation. So if you have fears around applying some of these tools, like, oh, that won't be acceptable, it won't be accepted, or no, I don't want to. So ask to be shown if that's coming from some other place that you could bring healing to in yourself. Or ask if there's a fear you notice in your own identity, your sense of being, and say, okay, let's take care of this, you guys. Come on in and let's heal this fear I have, and use your own protocol or self-healing regression and bring healing to it. And you can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful. And I think once I do that, I can just incorporate it in my own way into the pre-talk. So I feel like at least people have an awareness of, what's going to be happening in the session and so forth. So that's
Yeah.
great. Very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. You too, Deb. Yeah.
Deb, one of the things I would add to that is you can always use reframing and talk about the energy block, the stuckness in their life, and to work with it as a metaphor on an energetic level rather than giving it a name or calling it anything particular. I have it happen all the time with my clients, where it'll just come up spontaneously, especially doing hypnosis, and it's very evident that it's an entity. And all I do is say, well, what's this energy feel like? Well, do you really want it here anymore? And we just work with it on that kind of open, gentle, invitational way. And usually it works pretty smoothly.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I mean, I am finding that before I do the sessions, most people do have them, you know, and it's. Mhm.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, Greg, would you do our little closing for us, please?
Yeah. So, holy ones that love us forever and ever, inside and out, I ask that you be with us in our living here on this earth and help us to come to deeper wisdom in bringing service and healing to others, and strengthen this community of caring for that purpose and intention. And thank you for today. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everybody.
You.
Be well. Go out, spread the word, spread the